Elaine Benfield, and welcome to another episode of Herstories. I just am seeing this beautiful smiling face, and I'm so excited today to have Gale Daikoku on this episode of Herstories. Welcome, Gale.
Hi, Elaine.
So, some of you know I've known Gale for so many years. We've worked together in a variety of different teams. She's been a fabulous colleague of mine. We've traveled truly all around the world together. And, you know, I always start off Herstories why someone's inspiring. And Gale and I have been talking about her being a guest on Herstories since I started. I always felt, you know, I met Gale. I find her super inspiring, her passion. And really what I love is her dedication for, you know, your background, your heritage, but giving back really to, you know, the diversity, inclusion community is bar none. You know, you and I both are so passionate about it, but I think some people say it and you really do it. And you just, you know, it's a pleasure working with you. I'm so happy. I always say that, you know, you're in my really, truly inner circle, as you know. And I find you inspiring for what you do every day. So I'm super happy that you're here today.
It's an honor to be your guest, and thank you for inviting me.
Of course. So let's start off with, tell me, who's Gale?
Who's Gale? So Gale Daikoku Baumelaire, that's the other name. I have three names. My husband always asks me what are the rest of them. But Gale Daikoku, the person that you see here. I'm a mother of two grown daughters. I am just hit my 10-year anniversary at SAP, but before all of that stuff, you know, I was just a third-generation Sansei kid that grew up in the Bay Area, and what that means is third generation of Japanese-American immigrants. So I'm the third-generation Sansei. And I've been thinking about this a lot. A lot of who I became as this person that you know now is because of those roots that over the years I realized as a Japanese American woman of color, I guess that's what we say these days, that along the way, you know, particularly around schooling, university, career, here we are, you know, kind of I'm closer to the end of my career than the beginning, that a lot of that was something I learned as a kid, which was assimilation. So when you grow up as a kid in an environment with lots of different families, you know, we didn't talk about when we were kids diversity or people were different as much as we do today, right? So I've been thinking about this a lot in terms of the who is Gale. And my roots are really tied to those memories, those experiences of how I grew up, how I went to university, how I started working constantly. The only leave I took was when I had babies and took some leave, but, you know, working mom, kind of like, you know, that cycle, you know it as well. And to this place that we work together today, SAP, which has actually been a pretty amazing workplace. And I've been lucky because I've worked in some great workplaces where we're encouraged to bring our authentic self. I think that's how we say it. So that we can all run at our best. So like that journey from childhood to, you know, schooling, university to now, in thinking about like my passion around DIEB, if you want to use all the acronyms and all the other ones too, has really been around that journey of who I became, this person I became over many decades, and who you see today. So, and I know we're going to explore this in the discussion, but that's what it was. You know, I grew up, you know, oldest daughter of two. My parents were both, you know, we would describe them as working class blue collar. My dad was a Japanese American gardener, if there was a stereotype when I grew up at the time. And my mom also kind of worked I want to say she started working like around elementary school, and she did like people's houses. She like did house cleaning, errands, things like that. So that's what she did. So I grew up around a working mom, but not the same definition that you and I had. So that's kind of my background and how I landed here. I don't know if that's the answer you wanted, but that's
no, it's perfect because it leads into so many different conversations. And I think, you know, both of us, you know, as we've talked about before, you know, I'm first generation American. I might look like what you think an American looks like, but I'm not. I'm a half German. And I think that that's part of diversity, that I might be able to blend different. And that to me is, that was my childhood. But then when people, I had the different religions too. So then people are like, oh, well, wait, you're Catholic and Jewish. And so but it made me, as we talk about, it made me who I am today. Do you remember some of your childhood memories of, we talked about your father in the past, there's been tumultuous times of, and we'll get into kind of the evolution. As a child, do you remember hearing stories from your dad about, the hardships and everything, what he went through to provide a good life for you and your sister with your mom?
Actually, no. And this is the funny, not funny part of it. So, and I recently saw a lot of my cousins because one of his sisters fairly recently passed away. And now I'm the person doing the eulogies because I have some of the family history, a story for another day. But, when we were all growing up, they didn't talk about internment camps, what happened to them during the war, that they lost everything essentially, were thrown into basically prison camps, lost everything, and then after that they all went to Japan and in different cases came back. But they never talked about those hardships. We were just living life in the present, sort of tense present day around cousins and
Did
family.
they shield you, or they just didn't talk about it? Because my mother was the same. Like, she protected me
I think they
almost.
didn't talk about it because they were shamed, actually. I mean, we never, as a family, the cousins, we talk about this every time we gather, but it was kind of this dark time, and my dad used to say this term, and I'll probably massacre it, so if anybody speaks Japanese, forgive me. He would always say, shikatanai, and it was basically, doesn't matter, move on, in this term, right? And it doesn't matter. And so, like, and then I learned along the way, one of my cousins said, Uncle Tom, my dad's name was Tom, he told me all this stuff in high school when we were doing that stuff. And I was like, he never told us. So I got the history actually later in life from one of his great friends who we used to drive to West Sacramento from here, because I'm in the Bay Area, to go visit him, and he told stories. And that's how I learned about some of the really big details about who my father was before I knew Dad, and that he was basically a badass. The quick story there is, during the war, for those of you who may not know, Franklin Roosevelt signed an executive order 9066 that basically voluntarily evacuated Japanese Americans into these assembly centers and then threw them to camps. Well, in the case of my father and his family, and I always forget how many, I think it was like 10 of them. I always forget, I always have to write them down, how many uncles, how many aunts. They had kids that were, I think his oldest sister was maybe around 20, 19, and the youngest son was like 2 or 3. So everybody in the family could only take what they could carry when they went to these assembly centers and evacuate and stuff. So this order where they lost everything, they went to a certain camp. And in my father's case, they ended up at Tule Lake. Tule Lake is the only of the internment camps that had machine guns and like that kind of security, because these were families or some indication that they were going to be disloyal to what was happening. They were basically, in some sense, I would say, they were questioning how does this happen in America? I mean, again, not their words, my words. So they were all sent to Tule Lake. And the point of telling you this story is what I found out of my father, my uncle, his older brother, and I guess his father was, because they were labeled disloyal, it was related to some kind of a questionnaire, because they were of age to be drafted, where they were labeled no boys, because there were these 2 clauses. One was, you disavow the emperor or something like that, and then will you serve for the United States after being thrown into prison? The answer was no, and my answer would have been hell no. Anyways, so they actually got separated and sent to, I think it was North Dakota, during this time they were in their internment camp. So they were separated from their family because they were no boys, which essentially means these were the badasses that were like, yeah, screw up. And so I always attribute that characteristic in that story of my dad to like, well, that kind of makes sense with me.
It does. It does.
But
well,
that was the history.
But do you feel, so it's interesting because my mother did the same. She shielded the trauma, and until she got older, she then talked about remembering the bombs going off in Berlin during World War II. And, Do you wish your dad would have told you more stories versus hearsay, or do you feel? I mean, it's you can't change it, but do you think it would have
Yeah,
helped you better understand? Really, I mean,
you
what
know,
he went through.
I think about that time, right, when we're forming who we are as
Mhm.
young children. And I would say this, I wish that maybe around the high school age when you're actually talking around going away, because like at that time it's like, I'm going away. And I went to LA, I went to the University of Southern California, and it was like making that decision when you knew where you're going. Oh yeah, that's pretty far away, right? Plus it's a great university. I'm like never coming back. But at that time when you're sort of forming your opinions, your independence,
Yeah.
do I wish that we would have had more conversations? Absolutely, because I didn't know a lot of that stuff. If you do the timing right, I didn't find out about that no boy stuff until like I had kids, which was like 20-ish years late, more than that, a
Yeah.
long time later. And it was because of that chance visit where we were sitting down and they were visiting and I was watching the kids or something. And his friend Nobu was like, basically he didn't say it this way. He was like, your dad was like basically a badass is what he was saying, but that's not how he said it, and that stuck with me. And I don't know if he would have talked more, maybe a little bit. We got a little bit here and there, and it was only until when he was visiting me a lot, before he
Mhm.
went into hospice and stuff, because he passed away in 2017. We spent a lot of time with him. I remember one time I think we were at his house, and my husband was with me, and he just, it was one of those rare times where he started talking, and Troy, my husband, was like, "What are you doing?" He's like, "Take notes." So I whipped out my computer, started typing, because I type way faster. I think you do as well.
Mhm.
And I just, whatever history I got from that one day when he was talking
Yeah.
and a little refinement, is why now my cousins say, "Hey, can you do the family eulogy because you
Yeah.
have that already now?"
See, and it's such a gift to have that because I do feel that, for your daughters to know the stories. Um, did you feel, growing up, did you feel discriminated where you were?
I,
How do
you
you
know,
remember? Like, what's your first impression? Remember being like someone, because I have a vivid memory of someone being like, wait a second,
I
you,
have
you don't
two.
belong.
Yeah, I have two examples. Like in school, when I was little, you'd have the little boys doing this to you and
Hmm.
stupid things like that, and you just learn to ignore it. And I never, I would say, I felt this bias because it was the bias of, oh, you're Asian, you're such a brain, and I mean, it was that kind of stuff that you just kind of like dealt with. And I wasn't the smartest kid in the world. Truthfully, like in high school, it's like, oh, there's the brain kids up there, but they're my friends.
Yeah.
Um, so, in childhood and, those years, I never felt it the way we see it today. I mean, I think this has been an evolution, but there was um, one experience that I had where it sort of struck me that there are places in the United States sometimes that at this timing, when I give you the timing, it was like, that just felt weird. And he was my boyfriend at the time, but he's my husband now. I want to say I met him around 1990-ish. And it was the first time I was going to go meet his parents in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And Albuquerque, New Mexico is in the United States. I know some people still think that's somewhere else, and some days I wonder. But that first visit, and there was a hella ride to get there. I just remember this whole flight, getting there finally. When I got there, the first thing we did was go walk around the mall. And there was this mall there. And I talk like I talk, right? I mean, it's what you see is what you get.
Yeah.
And we were walking through this mall, and we're just having this conversation. And I kind of like looked at him and stopped him for a minute. He goes, "What?" And I go, "Dude, do you not like realize like as we're talking and walking through this mall, there are people stopping and turning around and staring at us?" Because he's a kind of a tall white dude, right?
Hmm.
I go, and he sort of was like, "What?" And so we kept going. And then he kind of recognized it, and it was like, I don't want to say I was the first Asian person they ever saw there, because that's not true. In the 90s, there were certainly people from different places, but whatever was going on that day, there were at least a couple people that stopped and were like, "Oh, well, that sounds like a normal person." It was just weird, right? So to answer that question, personally, there have been some things that have happened, not that stick with me per se, but there were a couple of moments where it did cause pause. And that goes back to this whole thing about my whole life, probably. It's this balance of assimilating, or whatever word we want to use, to a situation. It's situational, right? Even in business, it's always situational, reading the room, reading the situation.
It truly is. And it's, I think that now what we're going to lead into is, I don't remember when I first started in tech. I'm going to age myself very quickly. Like 25, 30 years ago, we didn't talk about diversity and inclusion. We didn't talk about equality. We didn't talk, I just remember we were labeled, as the different categories in whatever role you were. I remember being a booth babe and all these stupid things that they used to put labels on you. And they wanted me to parade in front of, like, get people to come to your booth and whatever. And it was like, oh, well, I actually can talk technology. And people were stunned that, oh, that girl could actually talk tech. Whereas they might look at you and go, oh, well, she could talk tech. Like, it was, I remember those things.
Yeah.
But do you see the evolution from your career that we talk about? We work for a very open company. That is one of the things I absolutely love about SAP, and like companies in general that feel this. Do you remember going into work that, we didn't have that? Like, it's definitely more common today. But do you remember that?
I'm a little older than you, but we're kind of in the same. Yeah,
we are in the same.
Yeah, but when I think about work, this is, there's like maybe 4 big chunks that I would say, even when I sort of say what's my experience, right? The 4 big chunks of experience were, one of my first corporate jobs was for Ticketmaster, now Live Nation. We sold tickets. It was a cool job. I got to go see some acts, and it's when I lived in LA. And funny story, that job and all of them were through my network, not because I applied for a job, but those jobs came through network. So I worked there for a couple of years, and in that culture, it was a couple of men owners, very old school from the promotion days and whatever, but there was a certain way they ran that company. I wasn't there long, I think a couple of years, and then, did some freelancing, and then my next company was where I stayed for 10 years. So I'm weird, so this will definitely age me. I was at Sony Pictures Entertainment for 10 years in a business that doesn't really exist today, but before there was Netflix and HBO streaming and whatever, there was this, and before Netflix was Netflix that we know, they had these little discs they used to ship, and before those discs there were these videotapes. So I grew up in the video business, which, like, our kids, you'd have to like physically show them. They kind of know what it is, but barely understand what a DVD is, right? And so I grew up at Sony Pictures, around the motion picture business, around the lot. It was so cool, still very dominated by men, but we didn't talk about it.
And I was white men, right? It was really
a lot of, and I was lucky because a lot of my mentors were those men, but they were always bringing us up. It's actually where the idea came to me at the time to apply to business school to get an MBA, because they were like picking up the high potential people and like, why aren't you doing this? And I hadn't, it never crossed my mind, and that's where that started. So from Sony, I was then a Gartner analyst for 13 years, a big chunk of my career. That's also when I had my kids. But, that was my first entry into tech. After the MBA, you go into tech. And again, myself too, 20-ish, 24, however many years, right, around tech, where it became more noticeable, more visible about how few women and people with some diversity might exist into those opportunities, because it's how you get invited into those rooms, right, and the kind of roles we have. Fast forward into coming here, to SAP, just hit 10 years, totally different times we live in, but really kind of cool that this is a company that, we have work to do as well, even though we've hit some metrics that we see on the table. I mean, if you think about, women are 50% of the population, so, plus or minus, right? And yet, even in our company, we're only at, I think, was it 35% leadership?
Yeah.
We still have a ways to go, but
it's steadily increasing. But still, I'm always shocked where it's like, and then of course I think the traditional roles, and I'm sure you felt this way from your previous roles of, especially at Gartner and SAP, women go into marketing, and women go into PR, and women go into HR. And it's like these things where I think tech does take away some of the boundaries, because you can have that diversity a little bit more, in my opinion. Like just with our company, I do look around going, because we're global, we cannot be this homogeneous company. We just can't.
Right, right. So, and to that point, like the paths, tend to be around communications, people oriented, pulling together programs. And I would say this is true pretty much for our team as well, that, our job is to connect relationships and dots, right? We're great at it. That's what we do. But that's why we ended up in marketing. And coming here into marketing, my mentor who drew me here first as a contractor and then 10-year career, he was like, I was like, marketing, because I was an analyst. He goes,
Yeah.
I was like, marketing, and he's like, no, you're doing this. And like I never labeled what that analyst job was, even though truthfully it's all about strategy, market, it's everything, go to market. And I never thought of it that way. So even in terms of the journey and where we landed, it's interesting and thinking about, but it is with that lens of, being open to look around and sort of seeing how we lead, right? And how this company runs and stuff. So many
And
great things.
I think it is, people are more comfortable. What we talk about all the time, we have a diverse team and I love it. And I just feel that I don't want to see anyone that looks like me. I just don't. I know that we do have, one of our colleagues, we look similar. But I look and I don't want that. I want to hear from people that have different backgrounds, men, women, everything in between. So how did you get involved in D&I? Because D&I term, diversity and inclusion, well now, and I have to look at it, it's like diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. So DEIB. And I don't want to say it wrong, but that has been, how did you get involved in it? Because you and I just have a core passion, but I don't remember how you first started. And was it here at this company currently, or was it before?
I want to say that it's probably more visible since we've been at SAP to some degree because we have some of the structures around us and a little bit of freedom, if I can use that word, to be able to pursue those passions, as part of what we do, around what we do. So I would say, in terms of signaling the interest and the passion and kind of channeling that away, it was absolutely here because we had the space to do that. I would say that for me, the drive, the motivation to get there largely centered around that moment of when my father finally did pass away in 2017. And that's about the midpoint of me being here. I was already sort of thinking about what's the change I want to bring. I mean, when somebody really close to you that, is one of your heroes passes away, you have time to reflect. And there were some things that happened around that time. My push around self-care, mental health, a lot of things. That was part of the movement. But a word that was like in front of me constantly, and I try and use as much as I can, was thinking about legacy. Legacy in the sense of what was his legacy? How do I keep telling his stories? Even, to my children's credit, them telling the family stories because we have to use our voice. So it was I would say it was around that time where I started to become more vocal.
I remember that. That's interesting when you're talking. I remember
and it's really around how we empower our voice. I mean, I have two daughters, to my credit and my dismay sometimes. They are very strong, vocal women. And that is not, that happened because, I guess, by design and environment, but that is something hard to teach or show. So they live with somebody who, by design, does that, right?
Which is why we click. You and I are both, and it's the good and bad, like, because you and I can be at it, but then it's like, oh, but we're just so passionate, and we're like the fire that it's like, but you push me to be better. And I hope that I do the same.
Right?
We push each other. We just do. And that's sort of being a strong person that, I do think it's interesting because I have strong children too. And it's like, some days I wish they weren't, but.
Yeah, some days it's like, so now what I need to show you is how to do the pause and the reflection, which again, even for me is really, really hard. But it's part of the continual journey we're on, learning about ourselves, who we are. I mean, I always tell them, this person you see, at my ripe old age here, this was years in the making. I didn't start off this way. I was quieter when I was younger, when I didn't have
I
confidence.
go back and forth. Sometimes I'm quieter, sometimes I'm not, as you know me. So, we talk about legacy, and I do think that that's something that, as you know, I lost both my parents too, and that is so important. And I do tell my kids the story, and my youngest son, I was 20 weeks pregnant, so he never met my dad. And so I constantly tell stories. Do you feel that D&I is part of that, of, all of us sharing what our history is to help define what this, being inclusive to everyone?
I absolutely believe that's part of it. I mean, when I think about, our job is also to help people tell their stories, to coach them a lot of times on how we do it. And we have to, by design, then be master storytellers ourselves, in terms of how we engage with people we work with. So I do feel fortunate that, and I believe your children are the same. And we can't call them children; they're adults.
No, now I have,
Are
both of ours are all adults now.
Yeah,
As of Wednesday, I've all above.
So our young adults, right? These humans that sometimes are still children, but they're coming into their own. I think because they've lived around us, they've become really good at telling their own stories. I use the example of my two daughters. They both pretty much know who they are at this point. One of them has known who she is for since she was about 12. And that's what therapy helps with too, right? But both of them are coming into their own in their own ways, despite the many challenges they might see that are part of how life goes. But one thing strikes me, particularly with my younger daughter, is that power of telling stories and how we show them was when she was, a couple years ago, when she was in AP US History, that little blip of unit came up about World War II and internment. Because even today, we barely talk about it. It's literally because it's at the end of what they have to study before they take the test. You almost miss it, right? But when this professor or this teacher that she had, she raised her hand, used her voice, said, "Hey, I have a book." Or actually, she took the book. I do have this picture book. I said, "Can I go show it to Mr. Mock?" I said, "Yes, you absolutely can." So she took it, and he messaged her saying, "Would your mom be cool if I held on to it for a couple weeks?" Because he wanted to use it as a tool to share with the class. So it meant a bunch of people would be touching it. I was like, "Yeah, it's an old book. Just, try, keep track of it."
Yeah.
And that was fine, because that's how sometimes those photos, because we don't have any other recollection, are the best ways to tell stories. So I think this idea of how we take who we are and apply that to something like, in this case, DEIB. For me, it's around the inclusion and belonging pieces, around company culture, around people, because we work at SAP, right? But I know there's times when we encounter a colleague or a situation where we can tell that that person or that situation is such that they don't feel empowered enough or strong enough, safe enough to say something. And so it's up to us as allies to kind of bring them into the conversation, whoever that person is, right? Woman, man, whoever, to bring them into the conversation, because that's really, for me, what sticks to me around that acronym, around that idea of making people feel safe and welcome. To truth be told, that's part of the culture that we build together, right? It doesn't happen. It's the people who make it.
It's the people. Happen. And, it's what I would love to get. Can you give examples? Because I think when people talk about D&I and they talk about, these organizations and how we're like, oh, our company's really good. And I know when people leave, certain companies, they want to look for that in another company. Can you go through, because it's interesting, we talk about, there's different workshops, we talk about that there's networking, and what are some of the things that you've been involved in? Because I'd love concrete examples of, what is it that makes SAP, or just in general, a company being,
I can give you a couple of examples. So I would say one of the coolest things I've had the pleasure of doing here was last fall. So through our corporate social responsibility groups, which is basically volunteer ambassadors, we lead projects. You do a lot of them. I do some of them here in Palo Alto. We have cohorts. I don't remember if it's twice a year or once a year, but there was a cohort for pro bono for economic equity. And this particular cohort that I joined was for Black-owned businesses, but also Indigenous-owned businesses. So in that example, a team of 3 of us were assigned an Indigenous woman-owned business. She actually had 3 of them, and we talked about 2 of them, and it turned out to be kind of a branding, go-to-market thing and stuff. So we got to take who we are into that project and in a pro bono way allocate some time to work on this project. So that's one example of how my D&I passions led me to something with leadership sign off to kind of take some time to work on those things and to bring something to life that actually is part of passion, but also your skill set that you do it.
And you're helping. You're a real world example of helping. Like, as we talked about, like workshops are great in networking and helping, always have a door open for someone who doesn't feel that they're included and help them have the voice. But actually being hands-on, and I think, we have social sabbaticals that you can do those things.
Right.
I'm waiting for my last one to launch because I'm like really want to do the program and go away and just it's something that I've just, I think there's some companies I think you have to, if you're not with our company and you're another company, ask the company what you can do. Ask if you can take days off, to give back to the community and help. It is amazing. You and I both get this rush. Every time I do a volunteering, I'm like, when's my next one? I almost, it's like I feed off of it.
It's like, for me, I describe it as my own self-care because we feed off of people. I mean, that's where I get my energy most of the time. And it's also where it's drained sometimes too. But, I get so much energy from that act of giving of yourself, right? Because it's not related, and we get to do that as part of the hours we get and whatever. And every company, we're lucky because tech companies usually give you an allocation of time. And I think ours is something like 8 hours, like a full day or whatever. And then, we're pretty generous on paid time off too, so you can use some of those days. But the point is that whether it's something like that pro bono opportunity or it's leading a cause-based thing. And last year I also got involved with this college called the College of Adaptive Arts, which is basically, these 2 women are amazing. They started this college level program for people that are typically labeled handicapped or challenged in numerous ways, because they wanted to create, once you turn 18, you're like basically off of a lot of different programs. So there wasn't anything to kind of keep them going to develop skills and things like this. So they've been doing this program for 15 years now, and I just happened to find it because I saw a license plate and I was like, where is this place? And anyways, long story short, I met her. They did a fundraiser. I jumped right in because that's like a superpower that we all seem to have because we've done it a million times. And it's a relationship that's begun, and it's in this space of giving voice to causes because it's something that interests me and it helps me raise up a cause just by participating in it. So when I think about your question about, why D&I and what does it bring to me, at the root, a lot of this is my identity, but it's also like, as we leave our legacy, as by example to our children, it's in the work that we do. And I truly believe that it's easier to bring volunteers and interest to a topic if you're rolling up your sleeves and doing it yourself. Because actually, sometimes you just need to have a conversation and say, hey, come along with me. And that's usually how it is, right? We try
that's what I do in Atlanta all the time. I'm like, okay, I'm going to go do this. And I'm like, you're coming. Cool. And it's like...
Yeah, and people appreciate it because they're like, I never would have done that. I can't tell you how many times I've just like literally put it up there, said, just show up. It's a couple hours. And they're like, oh my God, this was so great. It's like, yeah,
and
see,
and
now you can do this.
And it makes such a difference. And I think I want to be very clear on, people that are listening to the podcast. It's so important that we're not saying you have to do this 40 hours a week. We're not saying like just a few hours here and there helps a company, helps a business, helps, anyone with what they want to do. Some people just need help. And there's so many local organizations and community, and find the ones that you're passionate about. Exactly. It doesn't have to be these big national, international companies. No. It's
start with your inner circle or your life, right? And then just start small, right? It's like, it's baby steps. And like, if you don't know how to get started, just ask anybody. And, again, that's the easy part of what we get to do. But, a lot of businesses have these things baked in, in a company of whatever, 110,000. Sometimes it's hard to see how to get involved and stuff, but we're fortunate because we're connected to those groups, and it's part of the culture here, which again, a cool part of it, and we get to channel and do things that interest us because it's part of who we are, and putting that out
Yeah,
there.
and we just, as you and I, we both feed off of it and we just so enjoy it. So,
Yeah.
not to get political, but going down the road of, are you fearful today with the current political environment? Are you fearful that we're going backwards? Because
Yes, as a woman, as a person of color, absolutely. With an election in front of us that could go sideways and, make changes potentially for the worse. Yeah, so you can probably figure
yeah,
out what I said.
lifelong impact on society as a whole.
For sure. And so I think, now more than ever, it's there's an imperative for those of us who feel confident enough in our views, what we care about, to kind of raise our hand and get involved. So whether that's get out there and vote. I mean, both of my kids, I'm sure yours as well, knew like you're voting. You don't have a voice in this
That's
discussion.
what Alexander did. The night of his birthday, he turned 18 on Wednesday. He literally 12:01 registered to vote, and I said, "You know what? I've done something right. You waited up." And then he goes, "I could have registered 6 months ago," and I was like,
yeah,
"It's
exactly.
6 months before you turned 18."
I don't remember which daughter, but one of them registered like whenever they heard about it, like a couple years, and it was like, really? Anyways, the point is that to be part, to live where we live and be part of the process, you have to kind of show up and understand that they may not, that generation doesn't agree with anything, right? And even my views per se, but it starts with, we have a vote in the process. And so by advocating and getting involved, I mean, I swear I'm probably going to get involved in register to vote initiatives and other things, because it's really on the generation, our kids' generation, that, there's so many of them are so disillusioned, but it's like, but the process can't change if you don't get involved, and that's the big problem.
And I think, and you and I have talked about this. God, I mean, I'm such a passion with politics, but people, just because you don't like a candidate and then you choose, well, I'm just not going to vote, has an impact. And I keep trying to fight that message of like, that's why we're in the situation we are. People are like,
it's that whole thing of apathy, right? And some other things. I mean, you had a guest fairly recently, and she was talking about advocacy and activism, and allyship, which I thought was beautiful, because
she's
it's
an
kind
agitator.
of all of those.
She refers to herself as an agitator. She's like, I want people to get like angry and mad to make a difference.
I love that, and if that's what it takes, I'm right there with her, because the whole matter is, I mean, the whole reality is, if we can only bring the change that we want to see, but if by turning the head the other way, nothing's going to change, right? So we have to show by example.
Yes. And I do think you and I are two of the loud voices, which I love about you. But we can make a difference, and I think having our children see that we can make a difference, even something small. Every vote counts. Every opinion counts. Our legacy, our parents, we're who we are because of the life our parents gave us. And I think
and that's what I carry with myself all the time. I know you do as well, which is, we are there to drive the change we want to see. And change doesn't happen, whatever change, right? It doesn't happen fast. No. It happens over time, and we're in this for the long game, so we'll keep fighting as long as we can keep fighting.
Absolutely.
And be agitators.
Be agitators. And I'd love you to give, one question about, what do you want people to learn from your involvement with, DEIB, kind of philosophy? Like, what do you get out of it? That helps.
Yeah, I think that question's going to be different, right, for everybody, because I think first it's an acknowledgement of whatever situation we're in. Let's use business, because this is we kind of work in business, but like if you're on a project or you work on a team, there's always this fear of all of us being complicit because we don't have power. But the truth be told, that groupthink mentality doesn't ever make anything better. So we have to be brave enough, confident enough, I don't know what the word is in this situation, to kind of be vocal, not necessarily in a combative way. And, as a woman, we always come out punching, right? Because we want to be heard. But to, in a
And if
thoughtful
we're
way.
not, we're being told we are.
Right, exactly. But I think when you're designing tech products, when you're solving a community problem or whatever, it's really at challenging the project or the discussion. So when I think about what can people learn or bring into a mindset that makes things better, it's the conversations, learning to have those conversations to kind of figure out how you work through it. Because when you make a decision, like you're voting on something or whatever, that's fine. But if there's something in your gut, I always go for the gut check, that's like, that doesn't feel right. Well, talk it out, because chances are, if you might have a feeling about a situation, whether it's work, personal, whatever, there might be somebody else in that situation that's questioning the very same thing. And that's how we evolve. So for me, diversity of thought is like that D in the D&I, diversity of thought, and that applies to the people in the room, right? The people in the room, the types of conversations we're having, to make it better, or make whatever it is we're doing, make it better. And that's all about communicating. It's reading people, it's the words, because words do matter. It's all of that. And so I'm working on this.
I think, my father always said, he's like, always ask questions and always listen. Because that lets you learn from someone else, and their experience is not your experience.
Absolutely.
And no one's better than the other. We're all equal. And in the end, and it was those lessons that I'm so fascinated by people, and you are the same, all cultures, all backgrounds, I just want to always know and learn from, everyone's legacy to get to where we are, because it just, we're all not that different. We've all gone through challenges, and obviously some are so much harder, of course,
but we're human, and that's, and so if we start there, I mean, there's no tech that could, fix that part of being human, right? And so when I think about this thing, how companies evolve, I mean, right now we're living in a time where a lot of people are backing away from, DE&I, no.
Yeah.
That's in my view, that's the wrong move. I mean, I'm glad that we've got a team, it's important, and I hope that doesn't change. But there's, plenty of companies that are running away because it's like, we did this and nothing happened. But, it's like, this is not something that
and I think, Gail, I think so many people are fearful that they're going to make the wrong step, and companies and corporations in general are always worried about backlash. But sometimes being bold, you might get backlash. That's okay. And that's if you want to be a strong, I think there's so many great brands out there right now. I love Patagonia. I love, what was the one we were talking about, was Red Mill, how the founder just gave the company to the employees. And just, there's so many examples of companies really giving back, but also really making a difference, whether it be climate or, diversity, or, just any type of, supporting LGBTQ plus rights, being public about that.
And to that point, right, everybody's different. So maybe your thought about how you live your life, there's probably something that you do that you're participating in that process, but by cause, by interest, by even how you work. But I think, we show up better when we are receptive, to different things. Again, that term groupthink just makes me crazy, and when decisions get made fast, it's like,
I never loved it. I remember that was really a big thing a while ago, and it was like, man, it just doesn't, we're not home, all have the same opinion.
For sure.
You and I can talk about this, I'm so passionate about this, and I know you are too, and I love, seeing everything you're doing, and you're like tip of the iceberg. There's so much more Gale has to offer than I can put into words.
I think all of us, right? We are like that iceberg. You see just the very top, and for me personally, I'm working on getting a little deeper, because to kind of bring change in this space, this passion space, gotta bring it up a little bit. And so when we finally got this on the calendar, it's like, thank you for letting me spend time with you to talk about this, because it is this journey, from childhood to now, and reflecting on that, and how can I be a better advocate, a better ally, be an agitator so that people can feel like it's okay. You know, not everybody is going to agree with me or whatever, but, you know, feel brave enough to be you. And, you know, if I can be a guide along the way, I'll sign me up. I'm there, you know, as an ally.
I could not have said it better myself. I'm one last closing question, as you know, and they're
Okay.
kind of interchangeable to some degree, but not. What empowers and what inspires Gail?
Oh, I think what empowers me is the people that are in my life, the circle of trust, the people like yourself that give me the energy and the ideas to keep, defining those next chapters in our career and our life. So I would say that is the thing that really empowers me to keep being me, and then tone it down when you need to tone it down. I think what inspires me, oh God, if my daughters listen to this, they'll probably roll their eyes and say, really? Would be, this generation, specifically my daughters, because this is part of our legacy and the change that they will bring and the beauty into the world that we leave behind when we do finally leave this place. So I think what inspires me is like that work in process. When I look at that next generation is really what inspires me, and it keeps me motivated to keep doing me, because it allows them to kind of launch, right? Which is where I think both of our kids are, which is we're trying to help them launch.
Yeah.
Of course, they may not want the advice, right, along the way.
Yeah.
They're really
But
good at telling us that,
but we're always there. We're there to
absolutely.
help them launch in whatever
Yeah.
stage, and the evolution of it, because they launch and then they come home, and then they launch and they come
We're,
back.
we're kind of we're supposed to be the foundations of making sure that foundation is there, just like in a house, right? So,
Yeah.
so I would say that's the thing that kind of does it, but they are kind of interchangeable, right? And stuff like that. And it's, at the core, it's people and humans actually is the answer too, right? So
Yeah.
I love that.
No, and Gail, I truly, you are in my inner circle. You've been in my inner circle. And you pushed me to be a better human, a better person, a better mom, a better coworker. You've inspired me, I'll get all emotional. You've inspired me, and we're along my side many to a time. So, thank you for inspiring me. Like, as you can tell, like anyone knows my voice, I'm like crackling, really. And the difference you make, you're making such a difference and such an impact, and having your parents' legacy and yours, it's going to carry on with your kids and their kids. And I think that's, you're inspiring every day to me, Gail. And I'm appreciative you're in my world.
Well, it's right back at you, boomerang. If we were doing emojis, right? Because
Yeah.
that's the true nature of the relationships and that we build over time. And in this chapter here, in these days of SAP, right? That's a lot of why of how we bring it forward, how we pay it forward, and as I say. So thank you for inviting me to have this conversation, because it's such an important one that sometimes we have in our head, but it's great to have it with a friend as to what's driving that why, and that's a lot
And
of it.
inspire other people, and really
Yes.
get people, if you don't know and need help, Gail and I, you can reach both of us. We're happy to help you navigate as you're trying to find opportunities in your local community. We're here, and whatever you need, and just know, make sure everyone has a voice, because some people can't speak up for themselves or scared. And that's what, we're two examples of people that will be supportive. Gail, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for being on Herstories, and I look forward to
Thank
another
you.
episode. We have so many other topics we could talk about. I'm sure I'll have you back as a guest another time.
Well, thank you.
Thank you for joining Herstories. Stay tuned for another episode.